Naperville, welcome back to Real Talk. I'm your host, Chris Grano. Hey, thank you so much for joining us. This podcast is still in its infancy, and we're so excited that you're supporting us. If you haven't yet subscribed, go over to youtube.com/Chris Grano. That's where you can find the video portion of the podcast, the video version of the podcast. Or if you just want to listen while you're jogging in the car, whatever, go over to Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get good podcasts, and you're going to be able to find the podcast there. And so once again, appreciate your support. We had a great first guest. If you go back and listen to episode number 1, Paul Sereno shared with us his amazing stories about being a paleontologist, archaeologist, and explorer all around the world. There's some amazing people from Naperville, and there's an amazing legacy of great people and places right here in Naperville. So we're going to continue that theme today. So stick around. You're going to love this episode. That's all next on Naperville Real Talk.
This is the city we call our own. These are the stories of the people we call our neighbors. This is the heartbeat of our hometown. Naperville, this is Real Talk.
All right, welcome back. So today we have a great guest. I drive through Naperville every day, whether I'm just going to work or going to pick up something from the grocery store or dropping my kids off at school. And one of the ways that I go oftentimes is right by Historic McDonald Farm. And it's such a beautiful area, such a rich legacy and history here in Naperville. So today I am so excited to welcome the manager of McDonald Farm, Jason Halm. Jason, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of people, we drive by these great sites, in town every day. We drive by the river. We drive by some of these historic places, Naper Settlement. McDonald Farm is certainly one of them. And I don't know if we stop to think about it. I mean, I'm sure there's people who've lived in town for a long time that understand the history and the importance of these places. But I think, that's why I love this podcast, because we're going to share some of that. So tell me a little bit, you are a manager at the farm and you guys are under the umbrella of Green Earth Harvest, correct?
Yep.
Which is also a part of the Conservation Foundation. So tell me a little bit about the history of the Conservation Foundation and how McDonald Farm became a part of that.
Yeah, so the Conservation Foundation, we're celebrating our 50th year this year, actually. Was started in 1972 by a group of DuPage County residents concerned with, increased suburbanization and kind of development, eh, taking out all these natural areas that they had come to really love. I mean, in 1972, this area was so different from what it is now. A lot of people listening probably know that from memory. I can only imagine. And I grew up in Bolingbrook, and so these people came together and started. I believe it was called the Forest Foundation of DuPage at
That's right.
first,
Yep.
and they focused on buying up or getting their hands on land, preserving it, and then getting it to the Forest Preserve District. Since then, our mission has expanded but never changed. And now we're called the Conservation Foundation. Our primary work, or what we call our 4 core counties, are DuPage, Whale, Kendall, and Kane counties. But we do work all over northeastern Illinois. And the land preservation is still a key component of what the Conservation Foundation does. My boss, Dan Lobis, does that, and he does a phenomenal job at it. And we have also expanded into several programs. So Green Earth Harvest is one of those. The most near and dear to my heart was started as a separate nonprofit on McDonald Farm in 2002. First growing season was 2003. We're headed into our 20th growing season this year, which is super exciting. We're ready to celebrate the past and look towards the future. And in 2018, when Steve Tewald, who started the farm, Green Earth Harvest, then known as Green Earth Institute, when he retired in 2018, we merged with the Conservation Foundation. It's a natural partnership. We've always been close, but it's great to be under the same roof.
So you mentioned you got a couple big anniversaries, the 20th anniversary, of the growing season, and this is the 50th anniversary of the Conservation Foundation. So it's amazing. I think it's important for people to realize that those were some real visionaries, in 1972, and I'm sure leading up to that, little conversations, people who saw that this area was growing and saw the importance in the natural resources that we have here. And, I talked about that on another episode recently of the podcast, talking about the DuPage River and the artifacts that have been here from when Native Americans lived here prominently, and the farms that were here. We talked about with a previous guest, his grandfather's farm that was right there, basically across the street from you guys, where Knock Knolls is. And so these people who had a vision to say, okay, as this area expands and grows, if we lose this, we're going to have nothing. Not only aren't we not going to have the memory and the history, but we won't have anywhere for people. If we just urbanize like crazy, we won't have anywhere for people to go recreate, for people to enjoy. And I think that's pretty amazing. It speaks to the character of those people. Would you agree on that?
Oh yeah, and yeah, I've never met any of the people really involved in the founding of the Conservation Foundation, but I've met a lot of people who have been involved for some of our staff members, 15, 20 years, board members, similar terms. And Steve Tewald and his wife Karen Hutt, who started the farm, who started Green Earth Institute with tons of community support um, about 20 years ago now. Really, it's hard to imagine being, now it just feels like a natural fit. The
Hmm.
farm and Naperville, like we're so intertwined with our local community, but it's hard to imagine going to Brooke McDonald, the then and current executive director of the Conservation Foundation, and saying, there should be an organic farm here. And then Brooke saying to Steve, yeah, yeah, it should be you. Go and do it. Um, and, I just, it, doing what we do now, maintaining the farm, growing the farm, I think has to be pretty easy compared to having the vision and um, the drive to go out and actually start it from scratch.
Yeah. And, going back in the history, so the farm itself has been around for, generations now. And when Naperville was really starting to expand in the 80s and 90s, I read about Lenore McDonald, who was the owner at that time. And, there's kind of some funny stories, whether they're true or not. It sounds like maybe they are, of, developers coming, knocking on the door, and Mrs. McDonald, holding up her shotgun to say, no, I'm not interested. But again, a holdout, of a family and community members saying, no, this is important, and like you said, now in the modern day, being able to expand on that vision. Um, have you heard any stories? I know you didn't get a chance to meet her. Any stories about Lenore McDonald?
Um, I have heard that a shotgun was often involved. That
That's wonderful.
not not a ton of specifics, but a lot of adjectives. I've heard that she was feisty, independent, strong-willed, um, all said in really good ways.
Yeah.
And yeah, when she donated the farm in 1992, that the farm would be passed to the Conservation Foundation upon her passing, or upon her kind of giving up the life estate to the property. It really cemented, when she did that, they also wrote in a conservation easement, so that even if the Conservation Foundation sells this 60-acre green gem in South Naperville, even if we sold it to another landowner, it cannot be developed further.
That's great.
And that's like really the forever and ever um, vision that will impact just generations to come.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that I would be farming if she hadn't done that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing what one person can do. I think a lot of times, um, I don't know, it's a big world. You and I grew up in a world without borders, and it feels sometimes overwhelming, and feels like maybe the contributions you can make are rather small. But it's amazing. Just 20 years ago, and for her whole lifetime, and for a lifetime of these people involved, what one or two or just a few people can do to completely change an entire region. And I was reading a little bit, and I didn't even know much of this. You mentioned that the Conservation Foundation has now branches that go far out from not only Naperville but also DuPage County to other counties. But some of really prominent natural areas that we all again drive by and maybe take for granted have been started by, like you said, what originally was the Forest Foundation, DuPage County, and now is the Conservation Foundation. So we're talking about Green Valley Forest Preserve, Naperville and Woodridge area. I live right across the street from it. Butler Nature Preserve in Oak Brook, and what's now known as the Willowbrook Wildlife Foundation, and previously known as Friends of the Furred and Feathered. So, I mean, this organization has had just echoes all around Chicagoland.
Yeah, really profound impacts, and it's really cool to see how I think I said earlier the mission is growing but never changing,
Mm-hmm.
and how it's expanded out into organic farming, and we do a lot of education with kids and schools now. Amy does a great job at that. Amy Phillips does a great job at that. Um, my boss Dan Lovis is continually going out finding land that might pass through owners that might be valuable for conservation, and just him as a person, I don't know how many thousands of acres that he alone has stopped from developing.
Hmm.
um and it really is inspiring to work with a lot of people, staff members, board members. I mean, everyone involved is just like out to make the area a nicer place to live, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I agree. I mean, it wouldn't be the same without some history and without greenery. I mean, it's just so important as we continue to develop and the world continues to grow. We have to maintain our natural resources, natural heritage. So you mentioned a couple of things that I want to go back to now. So you're the manager at the farm. So I want to talk to you certainly about the farm programs, but I got to ask you about the farm itself. So what's it like, being in this historic property? Correct me if I'm wrong. Originally, there was a farm there that had a fire, and then the farm was rebuilt in the 40s. Is that correct? The farmhouse?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the exact years, but I know, and all of what I've heard, all of what I know about the farm is pretty much just like oral history
Yeah.
from staff members here, people who I talk to community members every now and then who are like, oh, my wife used to, when she grew up, she was like coming to that farm in the summers for picnics with Lenore and Sterling.
Oh wow.
Um, but the ranch house, what we call the ranch house now, but the original farmhouse, I think has burnt down a few times.
Okay.
Um, Not recently,
Sure.
thankfully, but the fire code wasn't in the 40s and 50s what it is now, for sure.
Sure. Sure. So I mean, is a lot of it still in its original state? I mean, pretty, uh, I mean, or has it been modernized over the years?
It's really interesting. Like, the most of the buildings on the farm have been here for a really long time, and I'm not sure of the exact kind of origins, but our as a farm crew, we kind of walked through this farm cobbled together from the past, farming in it in the present, like the old milk house, which is where they would bring cows in to milk because it was much cooler. And then they would store the milk there in kind of like very small pits dug into the ground to keep it closer to 50, 55 degrees, whatever the natural temperature of the earth is. That's our break room now. And it's
Okay.
great. And it's great in the summer for lunch when it's 90 degrees out and it stays 70 in there without any air conditioning. The barn is original to the farm. I believe it was built in the sometime around the 1850s, 1860s by actually shipbuilders who came in, um, who were building ships on Lake Michigan, who in the winter kind of freezes over, can't really do that. So they came in and they built this barn that if you look at it the right way, upside down, it kind of, the shape of a barn kind of resembles a boat.
There you go.
On the barn floor there is still it's either a chicken or a turkey, I'm not really sure, but a trace of a print from a bird, and you can still see where they had the wooden fencing in the barn keeping pigs in a certain area. Now of course we have a commercial walk-in cooler in there. And I'm trying to think what other historic buildings are on the farm. The house that Lenore grew up in came over from a few miles away, um, and was kind of transported here and redone in the early 2000s. And now the original farmhouse and um, the house that she grew up in are like fully functional office buildings
Okay.
for the Conservation Foundation. It serves as our headquarters. And then,
That's really neat.
of course, the building that I'm in now, is my apartment right now, used to be like the help's house, I
Okay.
guess,
Sure.
or like the servants' quarters. So yeah, it's just fascinating to like live in these renovated, all very nice buildings. Um, but it is history made present, really.
Yeah. No, it's amazing to like pass that legacy on and leave it somewhat in its natural state, but update it. And one of the things that I was reading about, and you can explain it maybe a little bit more, was the McDonald Farm Renewable Energy and Water Conservation Demonstration Project, right? So it's involving solar panels, and so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we have a few solar panels on the roof of the barn that, together with a wind turbine, I'm not sure how tall it is, but together with a wind turbine kind of nestled right between two of our greenhouses, provides something like 30 or 40% of the electricity for the entire property,
Wow.
between the offices, my apartment here, the farm operations. And then our watering system it's really interesting. We have a really small rainwater harvesting system that is a nice little landscaped water feature. But what I'm like most excited about is we have like a 25,000 gallon um, underground cistern that we can pump well water into to irrigate with,
Okay.
but it also fills up during rain events. We catch rainwater off of, I believe, 3 or 4 of the buildings on the property. Um, so when it rains an inch, we can get a ton, which it does often. We can get a ton of water filling that up. And we use that actually to irrigate all the fields on the farm. So we can back it up with well water if we have to, but we use a lot of rainwater um, to irrigate. And that at least the water piece of it was just constructed within the past 15 years or so. And it's funny, I was at a food safety training yesterday and we were talking about using different kinds of water for agricultural production. And whenever I tell other farmers about our system, they're like, wait, it's uncommon,
Okay.
I'll say, but it's a really cool demonstration of the way you can do things. Um, yeah, and that cistern really made it possible to farm out actually the entire property. Before the Green Earth Harvest, then Green Earth Institute, was limited to, you know, an acre or 3 or 4 here and there on the property where access to water was more possible. But
Okay.
this actually, it conserves rainwater along with the solar panels and windmill producing electricity, but it also enables us to do a lot more on the actual land too, which is cool.
That's neat. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's super practical, also, conservational. And it's neat how you kind of blend I'm sure that's how water would have been used 100 years ago, collecting in cisterns and things like that. But so you're blending the old again and the new, with the modern technology of solar panels and things like that. So that's very neat. So now I want to talk to you about Green Earth Harvest. I know that's your baby. That's the world that you live in every day. So tell me, just a little bit about the history of it, and what are today's operations of the farm?
Yeah, so Green Earth Institute was started in 2002. Steve T. Wald went to Brooke McDonald, and Steve had been a member of the Conservation Foundation for some years, I believe, and said to Brooke, "Hey, I really think there should be an organic farm in Naperville." And Brooke said, "Yeah, go ahead and do it."
Right.
And it just so happened that the farmer who was leasing land on McDonald Farm, what it just got to be too much, kind of transporting his equipment through the suburbs in order to farm this land.
Hmm.
So right around then, he was kind of stepping back, deciding not to lease this land anymore. And Steve was able to step forward. Him, his son, his wife, Karen Hutt. I cannot overstate how big of a role she played early on. And a lot of people from their church too, the DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church. I might have a couple of those words mixed around. But really phenomenal group of people to this day, very supportive of the farm. They Steve got people who were really interested in organic food. This is, I believe, pre Michael Pollan, pre farmers market craze.
Hmm.
Like this is, you know, a, in terms of Americans' eating patterns, ancient history almost.
Yeah,
Um,
I would say that's right. I don't remember talking about organic food when in 2000 much at all.
yeah, yeah. So Steve, they built a small greenhouse in 2002 that fall. And then in 2003, they started their first growing season in earnest. They had a small CSA of, something like 20 people. And the next year, something like doubled it. And they just kept growing because the demand just kept rising for it. And it just picked up a lot of steam over the next several years. They, you fast forward to it was either 2006, 2007, got formally organic, certified organic. Um, and then a few years later, build the first big greenhouse so we can grow through November. And then a few years after that, do some DIY cold storage. We can suddenly expand capacity. So in 2015, when I first started as an intern or apprentice, seasonally, we were we were providing vegetables to something like 300 families throughout Naperville and kind of the whole western suburbs.
Wow.
And the bulk of the vegetables that we grow go into what's called a CSA. Commonly, we call it a farm share.
Hmm.
But people get to pick up every week or every other week a box of vegetables that they pick out. And so when I say shares, that's kind of what I mean. And now going into this year, we will probably come close to feeding 700 families.
Wow.
Um, and we offer different sizes of boxes. You can pick up every week or every other week. Right now, we have farm share starting uh, just after Mother's Day. I think May 17th is our first pickup date, all the way to 2 days before Thanksgiving. And as we go further and further on in the future, we're really excited about growing into December, January, February, March, and April. That winter growing piece is like I've kind of latched onto it. That is kind of my baby now.
Like an uncharted territory in some respects. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Very neat. Can you speak to, I don't want to put you on the spot, but this has been a topic my family's been talking about for years too. And so can you speak to the importance of eating locally, eating seasonally, eating as much as possible organically?
Yeah, and it's funny in like a lot of meetings when we talk about like the phytonutrients or like the number of vitamins in a particular vegetable, my eyes just I think I'm in the minority about this, but my eyes just kind of glaze over. Um, but so if you, I think all that, I think it's backed up by a lot of science that it's better for you, but I'm not the person to talk to about
Okay.
that.
But yeah, I think it rings true though. And even maybe not even just from a nutrient standpoint, or biology, and there's probably a million ways to dissect that. But I think what what certainly is true too is just being connected to your community,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I was going to say, that uh for one, like, you're not going to get better vegetables. Like the the fall and winter carrots and spinach that we grow, the summer tomatoes that we grow, um the butternut squash that we had this past year. I mean, the quality of what we do is just unsurpassed by anything you can buy in a grocery store. No matter if you go to Whole Foods, Standard Market, Amazon Fresh, Jewel, whatever, we got them all beat. I'm confident in saying that. And it also, it the sense of, I think what matters for a lot of shareholders, and what matters to me when I as a consumer also choose to buy or organic and local food or sustainably farmed food, is that I do feel more connected to my community overall. I understand at least roughly where that's coming from. Um, and I understand that it is food that can be produced or stored in season. I'm a little more in touch with my surroundings. And, we talk a lot about how people are fleeing Illinois, especially young people. And I think some of that's overblown. But, you know, farming as a career, as a viable career, can really serve as an anchor for a lot of people. Um, who might otherwise move out of state. The local farms are something that local farms are just so flippin' cool.
That's the
and
quote. That's the quote of the show right there.
and
Well, go ahead.
and I just think that, like, that connection to community, to the people growing your food, connection across um, different ages, people in different life situations. Like, there's not, on the face of it, there's not a whole lot of other situations where I'm going to talk to a 45-year-old mother or father of three. Um,
Yeah, you may not have a common interest in other areas, but
e-
this brings you
e-
together.
exactly. We live close by, and we get our food from the same place. And it really builds local community in ways that I think cascade out and honestly do make the world a better place.
Well, you can't underscore the importance of food enough because okay, so we're talking about this today, right? Another conversation or another podcast, we may talk about a different topic, but nothing impacts our life more than food. I mean, we we number one, we need it to survive, but we eat food all day, and it's where we gather with family or friends, or other people to eat food. So it's not like a small piece. It's something that's ingrained in our lives. And so I completely agree with you. And if for someone who's listening that I was this guy for a lot of years too, that only ever got their food at a grocery store and never ever once went to a farm or a farm stand or a farmer's market. If you've not done that and incorporated that a little bit into your ritual for where you get your food, you got to try it because it's a totally different vibe. And I've gone, other farms in different parts of the country. We were shareholders, and gone and picking it up and picking up that box of food from the guy who was literally out in the field earlier that week picking it is totally different, than standing in line at the grocery store getting food that maybe came from Argentina, or anywhere in the world, right? Not to mention the environmental impacts of all that, right? All the miles put on, just to get that food to your door.
Oh yeah, and it's cool at the farm. We have some shareholders who even we're surrounded on three sides by subdivisions. On the fourth side there's a road, and on the other side of the road there's a subdivision. And so we actually have a couple shareholders whose backyards back up to the farm, and they'll just walk sometimes right through the farm to pick up from the barn, which is that's pretty much the lowest carbon emission food transport I think you can come up with.
Right.
There's a common saying among, or somewhat common saying that I've heard. It's like something like, if you're lucky, you only need a doctor once a year, and you only need a lawyer a few times in your life. Um, but whether you're lucky or unlucky, you need a farmer, a farm worker, at least 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Usually quite a bit more than that. I know I'm snacking here and there all the time. Um, and it's not to diminish anyone else's occupation. It really takes all of us working together. But there are definitely not enough farms and farmers and farm workers in northern Illinois right now.
Yeah. And this is an area, I mean, lots of places in the country, but I mean, this is the heartland. This is the Midwest. I mean, this is where still to this day, a great majority of domestically produced food is from. And I mean, certainly going back, 100 plus years. So yeah, it's interesting. I think what happens when we grow up in a big city and then the sprawl heads out, I grew up in the suburbs but still felt like I was a part of Chicago. And you just don't, your mind changes. You don't think about things like that. You don't think about where your food comes from. And it's maybe just a novelty, to go to a farm stand, like, oh, I'll go get some tomatoes from the farm stand, twice a summer. But you don't think it all comes from farms. This isn't Star Trek. It's not coming out of a magical machine. So,
Yeah.
so tell me, you already mentioned some of the food. What are some of the other types of food that are grown at the farm?
Yeah, so we grow mostly vegetables. We're definitely, our bread and butter is as a vegetable farm. We do some herbs for our shareholders, not a ton. We'll probably do more in the years to come. Um, and then we have started to do some strawberries that can be
Mm,
you pick for shareholders in the month of June, or when they're in season for those few weeks in June. And then we also are doing a few more melons here and there. So we're starting to grow into some of that small kind of, I'm tempted to say low hanging fruit, but some of the easier fruits to grow for sure.
fruit a little bit tougher to grow, right?
Yeah, and it just generally speaking, and like, so melons, you plant them out, they take 70, 90 days to maturity, whatever, but they're an annual, they're one and done.
Mm,
Strawberries are like a couple of years and done,
mm,
but for something like apples or peaches, it can be several years before you even get the first fruit of
mm.
them.
Okay.
And fruit is also really, really difficult to grow organically,
Mm,
especially things like apples, like trees that are there for decades and decades are
mm,
incredibly difficult to grow organically. And then our shareholders also, when they come to the farm, they can also, we have different farm partners that we work with who come to the farm and sell meat and fruit and herbs and flowers and some grain products um, throughout the farm share season. So they'll come on, whatever schedule works for them. But we have a great fruit farm from Michigan that comes in that sells fruit to shareholders. Hoof and Dick, who they're a meat farm, they have their storefront in Plainfield, so they come in, sell their products that are really excellent to shareholders. We have actually a physician's assistant from who works at Edward Hospital, Lindsay Gowans. Her business is Sweet Pea Stems, and she actually grows a lot of flowers on the farm,
mm,
does floral arrangements, and sells them to shareholders. And then Leah Rodberry, who is a staff member at the Conservation Foundation, grows some different culinary and medicinal herbs and sells, different teas, dried herbs, fresh herbs at pickups as well. So we understand that, like, we can't do everything. We're not going to try to do everything, but it's cool to build those connections with and to see those connections being built between our shareholders and other community members who also want to dip a toe into farming. or in the case of Hoofendick, who like are a very established local business with a long track record.
That's great. So tell us, how can people become a share member? What's that look like?
Yeah, so if you on the if you just Google Green Earth Harvest Share or the Conservation Foundation Green Earth Harvest, there's you'll come to the Green Earth Harvest landing page, and it explains what a farm share is because it's pretty unfamiliar to a lot of people. So my colleague Cheryl did a great job of building out something that really explains it to people. Um, I'm so in it that it's like second nature to me. I have a hard time explaining it sometimes, but that's a great resource. Another great thing to do is to just follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and there are links in our bio to learn more about the farm. You can follow along with farm updates. I'm always posting silly stuff on Instagram. Um, and then if you want to buy a share, there are links in there. We also do a farm stand on Wednesday evenings and on Saturday mornings from like at least early July. We might go out a little bit earlier, but at least early July until the end of October.
Okay.
Just right on Knock Knolls Road that people can always stop by, chat, buy some produce. We also have honey that a beekeeper who keeps bees on the farm produces honey from that, and we sell it to shareholders and to the public.
Awesome. So,
Yeah.
and then I wanted to ask you too about the education. So you mentioned that before, and I think I've driven by and seen some signs for, for kids. Do you do like summer events and things like that for kids, camps or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. So Amy does summer camps for Amy and her whole team, Connie, Carolyn, and a ton of others do a great job with um uh they have summer camps for kids both here and out at another farm that the Conservation Foundation owns, another much smaller one out a little further west, but through I believe mostly June and July. And those fill up pretty rapidly, but we have a great children's garden that they just redid a few years
Mm.
ago. I believe it's officially called Lenore's Backyard Garden.
Mm.
And we grow most of the plants for it. The kids have a great time working in the garden, playing outside, exploring all the nature, kind of hidden, tucked away in Naperville on the farm.
That's great. Yeah, and it's important to give them because, like we said, at least I can speak for myself. I grew up, not knowing anything like that, and so if we can get kids to understand where food comes from and the importance of being connected to it in some way, I think, like you said, there's going to be a whole generation then who's going to get more interested in farming and doing things the right way, taking care of our land, and then in return taking care of our bodies. So
Oh yeah, it's kind of, you can almost see that already. When I started in 2015 on the farm, I didn't have any experience growing food or farming or even really gardening. I had worked outside some, but I think that if I applied to this farm now with my 2015 self, if that makes sense, with my level of experience from back then, it would be a lot harder for me to get a job. Like there people who are just 7 or 8 years younger than I am value this stuff a lot more and suddenly see farming as something that they can do for a career and are actively seeking experiences out to make that a reality. Um, the quality of applicants from me to like the people that we're interviewing now is just like, and the crews that we've hired the past couple of years have been incredible. Like it's just skyrocketed since I since I started. I'm glad I got in early. I don't know if I'd get hired now.
So for people who are interested in that, right, they can go to Green like Conservation Foundation, and is there postings for jobs or volunteer spots?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's a volunteer application, and then they're on our under our employment opportunities. We're pretty deep into the interviews right now, but if there's someone who listens to this who's like, I gotta do that, at least send me an email, and at least we'll have connected either for this year or for some time in the future.
That's awesome, Jason. Thanks for joining us today, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Chris. It's a
Yeah, neat,
pleasure.
neat perspective. We're going to be interested to see how things grow. I mean, just looking at the history in this last 50 years and how things have rapidly picked up over the last 20, I think the next 25 and beyond are going to be really amazing to see what Conservation Foundation and Green Earth Harvest does. So thanks again. Well,
Yeah.
thank you guys for joining me here on Naperville Real Talk. It's a pleasure to talk to Jason today, and we've got more awesome guests like Jason coming up. So please stay tuned. Remember, subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find good podcasts, and we will see you guys next time.